Imagine a town with no fire brigade, not because they forgot, because they decided they did not want one. Too expensive, too much government, and anyway, the houses have never all burned down at once. There is one man in this town who owns the reservoir, all of it. He is not the mayor. Nobody elected him. He is simply the person who happens to own the water. Now a fire starts, and the entire town turns and looks at one old man, because he is the only one who can put it out, which means he is also the one who decides which houses get water and which ones burn. That is not a parable. That happened. It happened in New York in October of 1907. The old man was called John Pierpont Morgan, and the reason you have heard of the Federal Reserve is that it happened. The fire starts, as these things often do, with somebody being greedy in a stupid way. Two men decided to corner the stock of a copper company. Cornering means buying up so much of a share that anyone who has bet against you is forced to buy it back from you at whatever price you name. It went spectacularly wrong. The price collapsed instead. They were ruined, which would be a small story about two foolish men, except for one thing. Those men were connected to banks. And here you need one piece of vocabulary, because the whole story turns on it. A bank does not keep your money in a drawer. It lends most of it out. That is the entire business, and it works beautifully, as long as everybody does not ask for their money on the same morning. When everybody does ask on the same morning, that is called a run. And a run does not care whether the bank is actually healthy. A perfectly good bank dies of a run just as fast as a bad one. So when word got round that certain banks were tied to the copper disaster, people started queuing. The third largest trust in New York. The queue that mattered formed outside the Knickerbocker Trust Company. Knickerbocker was enormous. It was the third largest institution of its kind in New York City, and it held the savings of a very large number of ordinary people. Its president had business links to one of the copper men. That was enough. Depositors came for their money. Then a larger bank refused to keep clearing Knickerbocker's payments, which is the financial equivalent of cutting a rope. On the 22nd of October 1907, the Knickerbocker Trust Company suspended operations. And that is when it stopped being one fire and became the thing everybody had always been afraid of. Because depositors elsewhere did the sensible individual thing, which is the catastrophic collective thing. They looked at Knickerbocker and thought, my bank might be next. Within days, the panic was spreading across the city and into the rest of the country. There was no central bank. There was nobody whose job this was. There was no fire brigade. John Pierpont Morgan was 70 years old, and he was not even in New York. He was at a church convention in Virginia. He came back. Now, to be clear about who this man was, because the modern equivalent does not really exist, Morgan was a private banker. He had spent 40 years financing railroads, and he had personally assembled the largest corporation in the world. He was not the richest man in America. Rockefeller was richer, and by a distance. But Morgan was something the others were not. He was the person other rich men did what they were told by. He set himself up in the library of his own house on Madison Avenue, and he began, in effect, running the American financial system out of his front room. And the first thing he did was the thing everybody forgets, because it is not dramatic. He audited. He brought in young bankers to go through the books of the failing institutions, fast, overnight, to answer one question: which of these places is actually broke and which is just frightened? That distinction is the whole job. An institution that owes more than it owns is finished, and pouring water on it wastes water. An institution that is perfectly sound but cannot find cash this week is worth saving, because next week it will be fine. So he sorted them. He looked at Knickerbocker and decided it could not be saved. So it burned. It suspended, and its depositors, ordinary people with ordinary savings, took the loss. Then he looked at the next institution in trouble, the Trust Company of America, and reached the opposite conclusion. This one was sound. This one was worth the water. He is reported to have said, of that decision, that this was the place to stop the trouble. And then he did what only he could do. He went round the room and he raised the money. He put in his own. He leaned on other bankers to put in theirs. He got the head of the United States Treasury to deposit tens of millions of dollars of federal money into New York banks, which the government did because there was no other mechanism available. He organized money for the city of New York itself, which was days from being unable to pay its bills. He got money onto the floor of the stock exchange when it was minutes from closing, which would have turned a panic into a collapse. None of this was his job. There was no law giving him the authority. He simply did it, and everybody let him, because there was no alternative. Now the part of the story that people remember, and it is worth the wait. By the first weekend of November, the fire was nearly out, but not quite. One more group of institutions needed saving, and saving them needed the trust company presidents to agree, collectively, to put up a very large sum. They did not want to. Each of them wanted somebody else to pay. So Morgan invited them all to his library. And then, according to the accounts that have come down to us, he locked the door and put the key in his pocket. He is said to have sat in the next room, playing solitaire while they argued. They argued for hours. Somewhere around 4:45 in the morning, he came in with a document already drafted, put it on the table, and indicated where they should sign. They signed. The panic broke. And there was one more piece, which matters because it shows the price. A large brokerage was about to fail, and the only way to save it was for Morgan's own steel company to buy an enormous coal and iron firm it was holding as security. That purchase was almost certainly illegal under the anti-monopoly laws of the time. So Morgan sent men to Washington overnight to see the president, who granted the approval before the markets opened. The rescue of the American financial system required the president to personally set aside the anti-monopoly law at dawn on a phone call for one man's company. Now the other side right. That is a wonderful story, and I have told it the way it is usually told, which is as a rescue. Let me now take it apart, because the other reading is strong, and it is the one that actually changed history. 1. He was also, arguably, the fire. The system that produced the panic was a system Morgan had spent 40 years building. Enormous interlocking trusts, banks financing banks, credit stacked on credit, and very little of it visible. A man who profits from a structure being fragile is not a neutral firefighter when it catches. 2. He decided who lived and who died, and nobody voted for him. Knickerbocker's depositors lost their savings because one private citizen in his own library judged their bank not worth saving. He may well have been right. That is not the point. Nobody had given him the right to be right. 3. He was not doing it for free. Morgan's institutions came out of that crisis stronger, with more assets, more influence, and less competition. The steel purchase alone removed a rival. Rescuing a system in which you are the central node is not charity, even when the rescue is real. 4. And America worked this out almost immediately. Within 5 years, Congress was investigating the concentration of financial power, and Morgan himself was called to testify about the very thing he had just used to save everybody. Because the lesson the country actually took from 1907 was not that they should be grateful to Mr. Morgan. It was simpler and much colder. We came within one old man's willingness of losing everything, and next time he might be dead, or unwilling, or wrong. So here is the question: And I would like your answer, because I do not think it is easy. Is it better to be saved by somebody who was never given the power to save you, or not saved at all? Tell me in the comments. And be specific, because the depositors of the Knickerbocker Trust Company would have a different answer to everybody else in that story. What happened next is the reason this story is not just a good anecdote. Congress set up a commission to study how every other advanced country handled this, since all of them had solved it and America had not. There were years of argument because a great many Americans deeply distrusted the idea of a central bank, and a great many others deeply distrusted the bankers who would help design one. And in December of 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was signed, a permanent institution, publicly accountable, whose job is precisely what Morgan did by hand in his library: decide who is broke and who is merely frightened. Lend to the frightened. Let the broke fail. Stop the queue forming. John Pierpont Morgan died in March of 1913. He died 9 months before the institution that exists because of him. He never saw the fire brigade get built. He would probably have had opinions about it. And when he died, his estate turned out to be worth somewhere around $80 million, plus an art collection that was worth a great deal more. Rockefeller, on hearing the figure, is supposed to have said something to the effect of, "And to think, he was not even a rich man." That line may well be invented. It has been repeated for a century, because it is perfect, which is usually a warning sign. But it does capture something true. The man who personally held the American economy together for 3 weeks was, by the standards of his own peers, not especially wealthy. His power was never the money. It was that everybody else did what he said. What it actually tells you: 3 things, and every one of them is still live. 1. A bank run has nothing to do with whether the bank is any good. Morgan's audit found sound institutions being destroyed purely by fear. That has not changed. It is why deposit insurance exists, and it is why a bank can look perfectly healthy on a Friday and be gone by Monday. Confidence is the product. Everything else is paperwork. 2. Somebody is always the fire brigade. The only question is whether you chose them. In 1907, it was a private banker in his own library, accountable to nobody. Today, it is a central bank with a legal mandate and published minutes. You can dislike central banks. What you cannot do is have neither. 3. The rules almost always arrive after the fire. Nobody built the Federal Reserve because it seemed sensible. They built it because they got a good look at the alternative and it terrified them. Which is worth remembering the next time somebody tells you a piece of financial regulation is pointless bureaucracy. Quite a lot of it is. But nearly every rule in the system is there, because at some point, everything nearly burned down, and one man had his hand on the tap and got to choose. Outro next. The family that owned 9/10 of American oil, and the day the government cut it into 34 pieces, which made them very much richer. Subscribe. I will keep drawing them small.